Salt marshes are one of the most productive natural ecosystems on the planet, supporting a rich diversity of plants and animals that are uniquely adapted to inhabit wetlands that constantly change with the ebb and flow of tide. Salt marshes are treasured for this biodiversity they support and their contribution to marine productivity and commercial fisheries, their ability to anchor sediments and protect shorelines from erosion and flood damage, and their capacity to improve water quality. Salt marshes also function as filtering systems and retain sediments, excess nutrients, toxic chemicals, and disease-causing organisms. They remove nitrates and phosphates from the rivers and streams which receive wastewater. Salt marshes may experience salinities ranging from almost freshwater to full seawater, and anything living there must be able to tolerate these wide swings in environmental conditions. Temperature can also be widely variable, as the air in summer is much warmer than the water, and the air in winter is much colder than the water. Air temperature may be below freezing in winter and over 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. Because of these wide fluctuations, salt marshes do not have a great variety of biodiversity of animals and plants. Because of only a limited number of species can tolerate these conditions, the same is true concerning precipitation, with the average ranging from 5 centimeters a year to 30 centimeters a year in various salt marshes. In the climatogram, the salt marsh temperature readings are closest to those of the grasslands in comparison to other biomes. Salt marshes locations range from Europe to Africa to America to Asia to the coast of Australia, but are mostly concentrated in the 30 to 60 degrees north latitude zone. The most extensive development of these salt marshes occur in a large tidal range where there is a sheltered location and a moderate climate. You need only observe tidal creeks at low tide to see how much of the marsh is made up of that dark, wet soil below. Closer observation reveals the makeup of this soil to be full of broken up plant material or peat. It is also saturated with water even at low tide, which means all but a thin layer of the marsh's surface is absent of oxygen or anoxic. Zones of a salt marsh that are regularly inundated by tides tend to have lower salinity in the soil than zones in which the rate of evaporation is very high. Consequently, salt marshes in semi-arid and arid regions can have extremely high salinity. During the rainy season, with flooding and runoff from the land coupled with heavy rainfall, soil salinity can drop significantly due to the extra leaching that occurs. Temperature, the salinity of the water and soil, and tides are all abiotic limiting factors in the salt marsh. This community is a transition between land and ocean systems and thus contains aspects of both. The soil is saturated with water covered by shallow water, and this water has a salinity level generally between that of freshwater and salt water. The level of the water in the tidal salt marsh fluctuates daily due to tidal action. The tidal marsh has a complex zonation of plants and animals. The lower and upper limits of the marsh are set by tidal range. The high marsh is flooded irregularly, and the low marsh, including mudflats, is flooded at least daily. Narrow subtidal channels serve as connectors between the salt marsh and the adjacent ocean. Each of these zones is a distinct habitat favored by different groups of plants and animals. It resembles more of a terrestrial than a true marine environment. The plant community is more diverse than in the low marshes as well. Distribution, density, and activity of invertebrates are mainly controlled by protection, food, and frequency of tidal flooding. Salt marsh species rely on the decay of marsh plants to supply a steady source of food in the form of organic material or detritus, resulting from the decomposition of plants and animals that become the first level of the food chain. Microscopic organisms like bacteria, small algae, and fungi help decompose the detritus resulting from salt marsh plants. These microorganisms and the remaining decomposing plant material become an ideal food source for bottom dwellers in the salt marshes like worms, fish, and crabs. The cycle continues when the feces of the bottom dwellers is cleaned up by microorganisms. Anything left over is great fertilizer for the next spring when the marsh plants fill the marsh with green, lush leaves again. As with many food webs, microorganisms are the most primary level on the food chain and are responsible for more than one role. The same microorganisms feeding on detritus cover the mud surface, stabilize sediments, feed larger animals like crabs, and fish, who then feed larger birds like herons and egrets and add nutrients to the sediments. One producer, smooth cordgrass, also known as Spartina, dominates the regularly flooded low marsh. Spartina's successful adaptations enable it to live where few other plants could survive. It has narrow, tough blades and special glands that secrete excess salt, making it ideal to withstand the high heat and daily exposure to salt water. For other main producers like pickleweed, salt marsh grass, and sea arrowgrass, evaporation can be limited by thin leaves with scale-like hairs. Physiologically, plants are adapted by accumulating salt in their tissues. In this way, normal osmosis is possible. Other plants have salt gland cells on the lower surface of their leaves and excrete the salt from its tissue. However, because most animals cannot withstand the harsh conditions of the salt marsh, they have adapted their migration patterns and breeding periods to benefit from the protective environment of the salt marsh. Many marine fish use salt marshes as breeding grounds or nursery habits for juveniles, where they find an abundant source of prey, such as worms, mollusks, and crustaceans, and few predators. Many birds use salt marshes to nest, feed, breed, and rest during migration.